It was a quiet Tuesday morning when my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, the screen lighting up with a notification that stopped my heart for a split second. Saw package delivered to front door. Saw I set down my coffee, expecting to see the familiar white box waiting on the porch. But when I opened the door, there was nothing, just the empty welcome mat staring back at me. A chill ran down my spine. This wasn't just any package. Inside that box was my court-ordered medication, the kind that kept me on the right side of my parole agreement. Missing even one dose could send me back to court, or worse. I sprinted around to the backyard, my socks soaking in the dewy grass. And there was my package, smashed to pieces on the ground like someone had chucked it over the fence with venom. The Tampery VY Dent medical label was torn, the contents scattered like confetti. My hands shook as I knelt to gather the broken bits, panic clawing at my chest. This wasn't an accident. Someone had done this on purpose. 3 months earlier, I'd moved into Pinewood Grove, a suburban slice of perfection with identical houses, manicured lawns, and mailboxes so uniform they looked like they'd been aligned with a laser. I'm a low-key guy named Jake Turner, freelance consultant, keep to myself type. After a rough patch with the law, all I wanted was a fresh start, to follow the rules and live quietly. But from the moment I pulled into the driveway, I caught the eye of Linda Harper, the HOA's self-proclaimed queen bee. Linda was in her 50s, always decked out in crisp blouses and slacks, even when she was just grabbing her mail. Her smile was sharp, the kind that never reached her eyes, and she carried herself like she owned every blade of grass in Pinewood Grove. As HOA president, she treated the neighborhood like her personal kingdom, patrolling the streets with a clipboard and a glare that could curdle milk. And for some reason, she decided I was her new pet project. It started small, like these things always do. Linda would show up at my door, measuring tape in hand, asking if my Amazon packages were cluttering the porch and lowering property values. She'd stand there, arms crossed, her manicured nails tapping that clipboard like a metronome, lecturing me about community standards. I explained that I work from home and needed regular deliveries, office supplies, equipment, the usual. But Linda didn't care about explanations. To her, my packages were a personal affront, and she was hell-bent on making me pay for it. Soon, she was everywhere. Every time a delivery truck rolled up, there was Linda, lurking across the street, scribbling notes like she was an undercover cop. She even started snapping photos of my packages before I could grab them, calling it documentation of violations. The woman had too much time on her hands and a knack for turning molehills into mountains. Then things got worse. Packages started vanishing. At first, I chalked it up to delivery mix-ups or maybe a bold porch pirate. But when a replacement package showed up in my backyard, battered like it had been drop-kicked, I knew something was seriously wrong. I wasn't about to let this slide. I installed a discreet security camera by my front door, angled to catch anyone who came near. When I checked the footage, my jaw hit the floor. There was Linda Harper, bold as brass, strutting up to my porch in broad daylight. She'd snatch my packages with a smug little smirk, march to the fence, and hurl them into my backyard like she was tossing out trash. She didn't even glance around to see if anyone was watching, just pure, unfiltered arrogance. This wasn't just petty meddling. This was theft, vandalism, and a whole lot of crazy. But that smashed package in my backyard, that was the final straw. Those weren't office supplies or random gadgets. Those are my meds, the ones I was legally required to take to stay out of jail. Missing a dose wasn't just a health risk. It was a one-way ticket back to court. My hands trembled as I scooped up the wreckage, the torn label flapping in the breeze. This wasn't just Linda's petty HOA crusade anymore. This was life or death serious. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, my voice shaking as I explained the situation to the dispatcher. When the cops showed up, I was a mess, half furious, half terrified. I showed Officer Daniels the security footage and the court documents VY in the medication's importance. He watched the VY Deo with a grimace, shaking his head as Linda's performance played out in grainy color. "This is something else," he muttered. They headed to Linda's house, and I watched from my window as she answered the door, that fake smile plastered on her face like she was about to charm her way out a parking ticket. Linda laughed when they told her why they were there, while VYing her hand like it was all a big misunderstanding. "I'm just keeping the neighborhood safe from suspicious packages," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "He's probably just stirring up trouble." But when Officer Daniels showed her the court papers and mentioned that the package was legally protected medical property, her face went ghost white. That smug grin vanished faster than my packages. What she thought was a harmless power trip was now a potential felony staring her in the face. The next few days were a blur. A detective got involved, and it turned out I wasn't Linda's only VY Tim. Mrs. Carter down the street had complained about Linda rearranging her garden gnomes without permission. The Wilsons said she'd been measuring their lawn with a ruler, claiming it was non-compliant. Even the mailman had stories about Linda intercepting packages she deemed inappropriate. What I thought was just my problem was actually a neighborhood-wide reign of terror. The HOA board, which had always seemed cowed by Linda's bulldozer personality, suddenly grew a spine. Board President Mark Thompson called me to apologize, swearing they had no rule allowing residents to touch anyone else's mail. Linda had been freelancing her own brand of justice, and it was all crumbling around her. Then came the morning I'll never forget. I was at my desk, trying to focus on work, when I heard sirens. I peeked out the window and saw 2 police cars parked at Linda's house. Detective Larson stepped out, followed by Officer Daniels, their faces all business. They knocked, and when Linda opened the door, there was no charm, no laughter, just a woman who knew the walls were closing in. They read her rights, snapped handcuffs on her wrists, and led her to the cruiser as neighbors watched from their porches, whispering behind their hands. Linda's perfect hair was a mess, her face flushed with shock and humiliation. The Queen of Pinewood Grove had fallen, and it was a sight to behold. The kicker came during the investigation, and it was juicier than I could have dreamed. Turns out, Linda had a history. A few years back, she'd been tangled up in a CIVYL case where the court explicitly warned her about messing with legal documents and court order processes. This wasn't just a nosy neighbor gone rogue. Linda knew exactly what she was doing, and she knew the kind of trouble it could bring. Detective Larson told me her actions, combined with her prior warnings, could land her up to 3 years in prison and fines as high as due law $25,000. When they laid out the charges and reminded her of her past, she broke down, sobbing that she was just protecting the neighborhood and didn't know the packages were important. But the footage didn't lie, and neither did her rap sheet. Linda Harper wasn't a clueless busybody. She was a repeat offender who thought she was untouchable. As they loaded her into the police car, I stood on my porch, feeling a mix of relief and disbelief. The woman who'd turned my life into a nightmare over cardboard boxes was finally facing the music. Pinewood Grove felt lighter, like we could all breathe again. But as I watched that cruiser pull away, I couldn't help but wonder, how does someone get like that? How does a need for control turn into something so vicious, so reckless? And what happens when someone like Linda, backed into a corner, decides to fight back? So what do you think? Was Linda just a power-hungry neighbor who went too far, or is there something deeper driving people like her? Should I have confronted her sooner? Maybe stop this before it got so bad? And here's the big one. Do you think 3 years in prison is fair for what she did, or is that too harsh for a neighborhood dispute? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Hit that like button if this story got your blood pumping, and subscribe for more wild tales from the trenches of suburbia. Let's get this conversation going.